5 Live Formula One.
It's hot, it's humid, it's Singapore. Welcome to the Marina Bay Street Circuit, and it's the 15th race weekend of the season. And the Singapore Grand Prix marks the start of another double header for the Formula One circuit, because this time next week we'll already be getting ready for the FP1 session of the Japanese Grand Prix. But back to Singapore, and of course it's Max Verstappen, who I'm just watching get himself ready and hop into his Red Bull. It's Max who leads the championship, 145 points ahead of his teammate Sergio Perez. Max can't wrap up the championship this weekend, but together with his teammate Sergio Perez, Red Bull Racing could take the Constructors' Championship. Of course, there are 9 other teams on the grid who are currently hoping they can at least close the gap to Red Bull this weekend in Singapore. And they're going to all need to start on the front foot as we get ready for the first practice session of the weekend. And they're going to start fine-tuning that high downforce setup that's necessary around this tight and twisty street circuit. It's getting a little cooler, I have to say. I'm very lucky to be in the pit lane in the shade. But as I look out across the start-finish straight, some dedicated fans are busy fanning themselves in the blazing sunshine, and they are ready for this first practice session. Also ready in the commentary box is our lead commentator Harry Benjamin, former W Series driver Alice Powell, and BBC Sports chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. Well, Alice Powell, I've got to come to you first, because you have raced around this incredible track in the W Series. It is a challenge, even just being in Singapore, but racing in Singapore. Tell us what that was like.
I tell you what, Rosanna, it was a huge highlight from last year. Really enjoyed it. Racing under the lights, which actually you don't kind of notice that you're racing under the lights, which sounds very bizarre, but they're that bright that it's like you're sort of getting into a little bit of darkness. The sun's almost going down. You do wear a slightly less tinted visor, but you don't really notice it. But the layout of the track, from a fan's point of view, you look at it and you go, well, there's no character to the track, but it's a street circuit, and that makes it so exciting. There is certainly some tricky corners. That first sector's always quite tricky, and then going down into 10, 11, 12. And obviously we've got a slight change to the track this year, with 4 corners being taken out in that final sector. So I really enjoyed it, and I got a lot of rain as well at some points during last year, which added to the trickiness of going around this track. A track that takes a long time to dry when it rains, and we saw that last year, didn't we, in the race. So I really enjoyed it, and I know it's a driver's favourite as well.
Well, it is great having you in the commentary box with us to talk us through this race weekend here in Singapore. And there is the threat of rain, I have to say. A little bit of a threat on Sunday for the race, so maybe that will throw a little bit of jeopardy into the mix. But it's that balance, isn't it, between risk and reward. And Harry, this is a track that the drivers who've raced here before love. And we've got 3 rookies on the grid. Liam Lawson, of course, he's never raced here. Oscar Piastri as well, he's never raced here. And Logan Sargent. And yet all 3 saying they've loved even just driving this one on the F1 game or in the sim. It's a real driver's favourite because it's so tricky.
Yeah, it really is. I think Charles Leclerc was saying coming into this weekend as well, this is up there on his top 5 list of tracks that he's raced on in Formula One. I think it's something special. Under the lights always add a little bit something. Of course, this was the first ever night race, the inaugural night race in Formula One around this Marina Bay circuit. But as Alice alluded to there, it is a tough track, even for the most experienced, and that is due to simply the nature of being a tight, twisty street track, but the heat and humidity as well. Right now, air temperature just over 32 degrees, track temp 45 degrees, but the humidity is around 61%, and that means it is hot outside of the cockpit of a car, even hotter when you are inside the cockpit of a Formula One car. And for a rookie that also has to get up to speed with the track layout, it's asking a lot of them.
It certainly is, and I've just seen Oscar Piastri in the McLaren garage actually wearing one of those cooler vests that a lot of the drivers use. Often on the starting grid, they're preparing their bodies to take on these extreme temperatures. He's already got his on. Wish I'd packed mine, Alice was talking about the track changes this year. They've got rid of 4 corners, brought in an extra straight, but Andrew Benson, they haven't added a fourth DRS zone, and some drivers kind of wishing they had, because this track, I've bigged it up, now I'm going to smack it down, it does not deliver a lot of overtaking. So should there have been a fourth DRS zone this weekend, do you think?
Well, the FIA did look into it, Rosanna. They asked all the teams a few months ago, actually, whether they should try to add a DRS zone in that section there. As you say, they've taken out 4 corners, really tricky corners that have been removed as well, particularly the chicane under the grandstand, where lots of people have crashed over the years. But the teams didn't give a sort of definitive answer on it, and in the end they decided there was a safety issue as well. That straight, although it looks relatively long on the track map, it's only like 400 metres or so, I believe. So I'm not sure a DRS zone there would really make any difference. And there's certainly, despite what Max Verstappen said in the press conference yesterday, where he sort of seemed to suggest that there was a possibility that the FIA might look into putting a DRS zone there, that's not being considered this weekend.
No, and it's a little bit chaotic in the pit lane, I have to say. Sergio Perez has just been let go from the Red Bull garage, and he had to stop because he came too close to the pit wall. He had to be pushed back by a couple of the mechanics. So tight, not just out on track, but also in the pit lane. And that sound there is Max Verstappen, your current championship leader, heading out on track. Sunshine at the moment, but of course we go racing in the night time here in Singapore. So this is a bit of a different session, and I'm going to hand it up to you, Harry, as an Alpine also struggles to make it out of their box and onto the pit lane. So yeah, all going on down here in the pit lane. And I'm going to give it to you though in the commentary box.
Thanks, Rosanna. We've only had one weekend off and the drivers are a bit rusty trying to get out of the pit lane, but they are all beginning to make their way out. And for those that wish to do a little bit of a sync up for you, I'll do that now. 58 minutes and 19, 18, 17 and 16 seconds on the clock for the first of 3 practice sessions here at the Marina Bay Street Circuit. We're in Singapore, and they all come flooding out of the pit lane to try and get embedded into this track. And well, there's lots of questions that can be asked, perhaps not all of them answered across this weekend. As we mentioned, Red Bull could mathematically take the constructors title this weekend, although that does require Mercedes to score 1 point or less, whilst Red Bull need to clean up with a 1-2 finish and a fastest lap bonus point. But it could well happen. A street circuit, anything is possible. Equally, Alice Powell alongside me, a lot has been discussed about this type of track, and could actually be seen as a track where others could come into play for the win that are not Red Bull. But perhaps the minimisation and the taking out of these 4 corners around the Marina Bay in the last sector hands that advantage back to Red Bull, who of course are mighty in a straight line and pretty good in a corner as well. But I cast our minds back to Monaco, where we had the likes of Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin also very much in the fight.
Yeah, I mean, Red Bull just seem good everywhere. It doesn't matter what circuit you throw at them, whether it be a Monza, whether it be a Singapore or Monaco, they've seemed strong everywhere. So is there an advantage, disadvantage? I wouldn't say that. I'd say they're just so strong. Obviously, it's a high downforce track. We've come from Monza, which is totally different. But we've got teams bringing upgrades. McLaren have bought a lot of upgrades. They're only on Lando's car for this weekend. Poor Oscar has to wait till Japan to get those. But they got 9 upgrades with front wing, end plate, different side pod inlets as well. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on how they get on and how they get on with the upgrades. Red Bull have a little bit. Alpine and Alfa Romeo have some small ones as well. So people still bringing upgrades and feel like this is a good track to test them on.
It's a question of degree with Red Bull, isn't it? You know, the car's so much better than everything else, especially in the race, that even when there are tracks that suit it less, say, like a high downforce track like Singapore, for example, or Monaco, where Fernando Alonso very nearly got pole from Max Verstappen. It was only a brilliant final sector from Verstappen there that got pole for him. It doesn't really make enough difference. So the same fluctuations are happening as we're seeing between Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren and Aston Martin, for example. It's just Red Bull are on a separate level. Having said that, Verstappen was saying yesterday this is the sort of track where they struggle is the wrong word, Alice, isn't it? But where their advantage is less profound than it is at some other tracks. But no one's kidding themselves that Red Bull aren't aren't going to win the race. It'll take Verstappen to stack it or for the car to fail to not win the race. We're seeing Fernando Alonso going wide at the first corner. It's quite unlike him, actually, a sort of wobbly moment through the runoff area there. Having said that, it's the sort of track where you might expect someone like Ferrari or perhaps Alonso or even Mercedes to threaten Verstappen for pole, and it's the sort of track where Sergio Perez may find it a struggle to get onto the front row with Verstappen.
Well, they do have such a buffer, don't they? Even if it is a bit of a less dominant weekend for Red Bull, they have such a buffer over the second place teams that they'll still probably end up in front of everybody. But pretty much every team bringing quite a lot of upgrades, some bringing some new liveries as well for this weekend, along with many new helmet designs. McLaren being one of those. Tweaked livery, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri sporting some Singapore-specific helmets as well, and Rosanna, I believe, is outside McLaren.
I certainly am, and I've been watching the mechanics who've been waiting patiently, holding a front wing for Lando Norris. So he's going to be coming back in to get rid of the front wing he's gone out with to start with. And McLaren splitting the upgrades this weekend. We've seen that before with them, haven't we? Lando Norris getting the upgrade this weekend, and then, all being well, Oscar will get them next weekend. They didn't have both ready to go this weekend, and it's in this session we're going to get a better understanding of the full range of the aero upgrades that they're bringing. And it's Lando saying he's really excited about this, actually, because he thinks it's going to be an exciting couple of weekends. So when we talk about who can mix it with Red Bull, definitely putting McLaren into that box. And Lando saying that they're just focusing on the weaknesses at low speed. And of course, this is a tight and twisty track, so these upgrades could really help them this weekend. And he says it's the most significant upgrade since Austria. And that was, of course, when we started talking about them.
Does it smell a little bit smoky? I don't know. We're checking.
That's Zhou Guanyu at the Alfa Romeo team on his radio, saying something smells a bit smoky, fresh off the back of signing a contract extension with the team. We'll come to that shortly, but just picking up of what Rosanna was mentioning about McLaren, or Norris is currently fastest, a 1:37.895 on that medium or compounder tyre. And with this changed layouts, with the corners taken out by the Marina Bay area, and that is because there's some redevelopment work going on down there in the NS Square areas, and they're building an outdoor multi-purpose venue in that downtown area. So that's why we had to cut those out this weekend. So instead of going through that nice right-left twisty section where you then come back underneath the grandstand and then rejoin the final chicane, which brings you then to the fast double left-hander for the final corner, we now go down a straight, essentially just short of 400 metres straight, which brings us to the turn 16-17 chicane, a mini straight before you then back on to the main straight around the final corners. 52 minutes and 9 seconds. Norris leads. Gasly, Bottas, Verstappen, Leclerc, Magnussen, Russell, Sainz, Hamilton, Hülkenberg, the top 10 at the moment. But everybody out there just getting geared up, setting their first couple of laps and getting to grips with this circuit, which of course, Alice, is going to be, although these are actual roads that are used during the year, a lot of it are sometimes they're service roads as well, or back streets. It is quite dusty offline. We saw Fernando Alonso having a little trouble, Lando Norris in the McLaren. As soon as you dip a wheel offline, the dust that comes up, it's going to take a while for that to get grippy.
Yeah, I remember that from last year, actually, and that was one of the things I was going to mention, especially if you run ever so slightly wide very early on in these sessions. The walls come at you quickly, but they come up even quicker.
Okay, quite aggressive downshifts, and I struggle a bit mid to exit all the time. A lot of movement steer in every, basically.
That could be, Max, because of the dust, and that's one thing I remember. There was so much dust, even online, especially in the first part of the session. So I expect it to dial in fairly quickly. There's a lot of cars that are out. Stroll, I believe, at the moment is still in the pits. We saw a shot of him just waiting in the garage. We've had rain as well. Sergio Perez ran slightly wide at turn 1, and there's like the AstroTurf that you might see on your football pitches or your hockey pitches, and that keeps a lot of water in. And if you do run wide on that, it can be pretty slippy as well. So offline it's slippy, online it also could be slightly slippy as well. It's just going to take time for the dust to clear, because obviously this is the first running. They usually only have 1 or 2 support races. I think they might just have one this weekend of a GT support race. So there's not much track action to clear this dust this weekend. So the F1 cars will be doing the majority of the cleaning.
Well, they're out there cleaning it up quite quickly. In terms of how the standings look at the moment, Max Verstappen is leading with 364 points to his name. He's 105 clear of his teammate Sergio Perez, who has 219 points. Fernando Alonso, 170 points. Lewis Hamilton, 164 points. There's a nice battle going on there for third.
Struggle to see the apexes, so I might need to come up a bit with the seat.
Oh, and that's Sergio Perez saying he's a bit of a seat adjustment there, the winner from last year.
Yeah, so maybe he's had a new seat. So the seats are moulded to the body. So that usually takes place in the workshop, and then they would send the seats out with the freight or in a freight. And it can be a lengthy job to make a seat. It's usually not a quick thing, but it's moulded to the body, ultra strong as well, carbon. So he's obviously had a new seat and feels like he needs to raise up ever so slightly. So they might put some sort of padding, fireproof padding underneath his bottom or his back to raise him ever so slightly. But that's not what you want, especially around a street circuit, a tricky street circuit. To not be able to see the apexes, Andrew, is not ideal.
Indeed not. And something else that drivers don't want is lack of track time. It's all about confidence on street circuits, and poor Lance Stroll is probably the wrong way to describe him. He's in the garage at the moment. The mechanics are sort of working on the car, but not doing so with any particular urgency on the shots we saw a couple of minutes ago. And if he's got a problem that keeps him out of this session, that's going to be the second race in a row where Lance Stroll suffered on the Friday, and Singapore is really not the sort of place where you want to be losing that amount of track time. No, exactly. So he'll be hoping that that problem gets sorted. He had not a bad result here though last year. He finished P6 ahead of his teammate.
It was his best result of the year.
So a track that he likes. But as you said, Andrew, it's not ideal when it's a tricky circuit. They don't get much running on it anyway, especially when you can have mixed weather throughout a weekend. Harry, you did say to me they expect some rain when they usually do, and when it rains, I'm telling you, wow, doesn't it rain? It absolutely chucks it down with rain. And actually I was surprised because everyone said to me, it'll surely just dry quite quickly. Even though it's warm and humid, it doesn't. And we saw that in the race last year, where actually it took a long time. I think, was it in the near sort of early 30, lap 30, that we saw them go on to slick tyres?
It's because it's not in the daytime, so you haven't got the sun drying it with radiation. It just requires it to sort of evaporate normally, and that's why with a night race it takes a while for it to dry out. You're right, Alice, when it rains you certainly can't drive a Formula 1 car in Singapore. It's tropical rain, as you would imagine. It's quite welcome in some ways when it rains, yes. But even so, you don't want to be caught in it, because it's basically like having a shower.
Yeah, it is. I actually remembered some of the puddles that formed in the W Series qualifying session ended up being red flagged last year, and I remember going down from turn 5 to 7, and some of the puddles were huge, and actually that made it a little bit hard with the lights to sort of see where some of the bigger puddles were. But because the lights were shining, the surface just looked shiny, so it was hard to judge how deep the puddles were. And I remember having a big swapper on the exit of 5, and I think someone ended up being caught out by a large puddle down between 6 and 7 and spinning round the flat out straight, which then eventually caused the red flag. But I remember Fernando Alonso struggled last year in his Alpine and came on the radio to the team and said, guys, it's hard to see whether it's drying or not, because I can't see a dry line from a wet line, and that's due to the lights.
And just an update on Lance Stroll, it's not a problem with the car. They're just taking off some aero rakes, those little sort of scaffolding structures that you see on the cars which measure the airflow, and some setup changes, so it's planned, so he should be okay.
Yeah, I think Rosanna is outside Aston Martin now, so what are you seeing with your eyes, Rosanna?
Well, I've just seen Lance Stroll get back in the car. The mechanic is putting him in and strapping him in, making sure the headrest is where it needs to be, keeping cool. He's just actually wiping his eyes with a towel that his physio's just passed him. That is how hot it is down here in the pit lane, even though the sun isn't on us. But the team calling it planned downtime. I think probably Lance wants to get out there and have a bit more playtime, don't you? I've just seen also on the back of the Red Bull rear wing a bit of that Flow-Vis paint. That's helping the engineers get the data on how the air is travelling over the car. And Red Bull, you might think that they don't need to keep on pushing because they're so far ahead. Of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the programme, they can take the Constructors' Championship this weekend. But no, they've already turned up their rear wing a little bit, and they say that they've copied the ideas from other people on the grid, being very honest about that. So a slight change to their rear wing this weekend. And then the other end of the pit lane, where I will head to shortly, Max Verstappen on the radio there. I'm going to head down to Williams because they've also split duties this weekend. They've got new front wings, but only Alex Albon running the new one, Logan Sargent with the old spec too. So it's tricky with these flyways to get the upgrades to where they need to be, given they've got to travel around the world. So lots of scheduling, lots of logistics at play, whilst they focus on what they need to do on track as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rosanna. It's an interesting one because you think as you start to get to the flyaways, especially in the budget cap era of Formula 1 that we're in, bringing upgrades at least of this ilk and how many teams are bringing them, it's a bit surprising actually to see so many, but that's how clearly they're still in the fight for this and want to take it to the very end of the year, as Leclerc is currently fastest, the 1:35.683, 9,000ths clear of the McLaren of Lando Norris. Sainz is third, Verstappen, Gasly the top 5, Perez, Hamilton, Albon, Ocon, Tsunoda the top 10, Hülkenberg, Piastri, Alonso, Russell, Bottas the top 15, ahead of Magnussen, Zhou, Lawson, Sargent and Lance Stroll, who is now out of his Aston Martin garage and on an outlap.
So, Harry, on the bringing upgrades at this stage of the season, it feels when you start going to the long-haul races, or as you say, the flyaways, as they're described in Formula 1 jargon, you think, oh, we're coming to the end of the season. There's 8 races to go. You know, it's in like 12 weeks or something. It's insane. So it's more than a third of the season. So we're not getting to the end of it at all. So no wonder they're still bringing upgrades, really. But
surely it's over when Red Bull and Verstappen sweep up everything.
Well, the championship's over. But remember, the rules stay the same for next year. So everything they do to these cars is learning for next year. Although in the case of Mercedes, obviously they, or at least we imagine, they're going to fundamentally change their car. I think Lewis Hamilton will be extremely cross if they don't.
Yeah, well, speak of the 4-time Singapore winner, he's just gone fastest. 1:35.5 for Lewis Hamilton.
Teams are already planning and starting to develop their car for these new rules that are coming in. So I know probably most of the teams, as we're seeing Alex Albon, wasn't much more room there on the exit of 17 to the barrier, but yeah, they're already planning their cars for 25, 26. So that's how far ahead the teams look in terms of development of these cars. So they are bringing in upgrades still, because points make prizes. The Constructors' Championship is still pretty packed in that middle section, isn't it, really, between, you say you've got Aston and Ferrari and Mercedes. They've got a nice battle going on there in sort of fourth up to second, and then of course you've got McLaren and Alpine that are scrapping for fifth and sixth, and the prize money, we'll say prize money, it's not necessarily prize money, but the money that the teams can get in terms of where they finish in the Constructors, it can make a big difference.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Alice. I mean, this is far from over. Yes, Red Bull take the trophy, but there is so much more at stake. The prize money, the wind tunnel testing time, but such is the bandwidth, I think, of these teams and the high-powered individuals that make up the numbers. I have to say, they are already focusing on 2026. I was talking to Williams team principal James Fowles earlier. They've already got an eye on that. It's not just 2024. So they're able to balance so much. But my goodness me, if you told some of the teams on this grid that it was all over when Red Bull take the trophy, they would definitely disagree, because they need that money and they need that wind tunnel testing time next year. And that's what they're all fighting for. It may seem weird that you're getting excited over fourth or fifth in the Constructors, but it's all to play for still. And yes, Andrew, there's a long way to go, isn't there, till the finish line at Abu Dhabi?
there certainly is. But as everyone picks up on that fight for certainly the mid-pack in the Constructors really tight. Mercedes in second, but they have got a bit of a gap now over Ferrari, who of course leapfrogged Aston Martin last time out after their Monza result, and Carlos Sainz getting on for the podium for the first time this season. This is the sound of Lance Stroll in that Aston Martin, who comes through the double left-hander that sees out the lap with the Singapore Flyer, the huge Ferris wheel which overlooks the track as we see the green Aston Martin as the sun reflects off of it, cross the line, and for Stroll's first proper lap time out there after a lengthy period in the garage, still plumb last at the moment on the hard compound of tyre and getting geared up as reserve driver Stoffel van Dorn watches on from the garage. But upgrades galore being brought. Lando Norris in the McLaren with particular amount of upgrades. He's currently fastest, half a second clear, I should say, from Sergio Perez. AlphaTauri also bringing a lot of upgrades as well to Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson's car. New floor, diffusers, even some new rear view mirrors and side pod engine cover, the works. And Tsunoda currently 9th. Liam Lawson back in the car once again in place of Daniel Ricciardo, who has a broken metacarpal bone after his injury sustained at the Zandvoort round in the Netherlands. Still out, but he is here in Singapore, only for engineering purposes though. What does that mean, Alice?
Well, he's there to carry on learning with the team, to put his input. Very experienced driver.
I know he's very experienced, and I think they had this discussion on the Checkered Flag podcast as well, which you can have a listen to as well in between FP1 and FP2. But sooner or later, Liam Lawson is going to end up with more experience of this particular car.
Yeah, well, that's why Daniel's there, to gather and absorb as much information as possible about the car. If I was Daniel, I'd be doing that exact thing, going there, sitting on the pit wall, listening into the chat, trying to understand how the car handles, what's the car's characteristics are like. He'll have a rough idea from the simulator anyway, but there's nothing quite like being there, being in the debriefs, understanding everything, and also seeing how the team works as well, because every team works differently. So he will then be getting used to the differences racing at McLaren or racing at Red Bull or racing at Renault. AlphaTauri will work different, as we are just seeing Lewis Hamilton pull in at a very sort of strange angle into his pit box. Maybe it was a last minute call for him to not do a pit stop practice, but anyway, he's being wheeled back into the garage now. But back to Daniel Ricciardo, yeah, I totally see why he's there. And also, just to be a face, I'd be a face to show, hey Liam, yeah, you may be taking my seats, but don't forget that I'm still here, I'm watching you.
Well, you know what, the last pieces of the driver market puzzle are coming into place, coming into this weekend. Alfa Romeo announcing that Valtteri Bottas, who was nailed on anyway for another year, will partner up once again with Zhou Guanyu. And there was a little bit of uncertainty over that seat. We were hearing Alfa Romeo were in discussions with the likes of the F2 champion Felipe Drugovich, who has apparently found quite a lot of backing, the Brazilian racer. That is not meant to be. They're going to keep Zhou Guanyu for at least another year. Right call for Alfa, which will become, we think, Sauber in the next couple of years until Audi come in 2026.
Do you know what? I think it is a right call. Obviously, money, it comes down to money at the end of the day. But you said about Drugovich having backing, well, so as Zhou Guanyu as well. But I think he's actually done a pretty good job, in all honesty. You know, it's never easy coming into Formula One, whatever your background, how many championships you've raced in, how many races you've raced in Formula 2. You've still got to do the job. It's still a big step up. And actually, I think he's done a fairly decent job. Okay, he's sitting down in 16th in the championship, a couple of points behind Valtteri. So, you know, he's still being there or thereabouts to his teammate, his very much more experienced teammate. So I would say it's the right call.
So there are 30 million reasons why Zhou Guanyu's got that seat. Let's not forget, they're in a kind of holding pattern. It was kind of surreal yesterday, I think, what I thought, when they announced that driver lineup. Because Alfa Romeo were announcing that Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu were still going to be driving for them next year. Well, they're not going to be driving for Alfa Romeo next year. It's not going to be called Alfa Romeo. That team, we don't know what it's going to be called next year, but that team is going to become Audi in 2026. Audi already own a significant shareholding. I don't know exactly where the share transition has got to yet, but and they're building up to when Audi enter in 2026, by which time Sauber, as the team really is, have to be competitive, or at least decently competitive, or at least a lot more competitive than they are now. So while they're focusing on infrastructure and developing the team and making the car better and all the rest of it, it's not that important, you know, whether they have an ace driver lineup. I can't say for sure, but I'd be stunned if Zhou Guanyu's still in that car in 2026. That's a whole other question.
What about Bottas?
Same.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? For them as drivers, it's a difficult situation because they are in this, as you say, holding pattern where they want... I think Zhou Guanyu was wanting a longer-term contract, but of course they can't do that because Audi are going to come in and Alfa Romeo are branded and badged on the team this year. They are the Alfa Romeo F1 team, but it will revert. Well, they will leave at the end of the year, and it will come back to whatever Sauber or whatever name it comes to be. So it's a difficult one. Of course, the Chinese Grand Prix back on the calendar next year. That's got to be a huge incentive as well to have Zhou on boards. And if we're looking longer term, for Audi as a car manufacturer and brand, if Zhou does suddenly, along with the car, score some great results, consistent points, there is argument there to keep him, I think, because I'm sure Audi would want to utilise Zhou's Chinese market to sell cars.
I'm sure it all comes down to being political and the money side of things. Andrew's obviously already touched on.
How much was it? 30 million reasons?
But, you know, I think he's done a good job, and it'd be nice for him, actually. I know people say, oh, a race in China, and it adds a lot of travelling already to the teams, that they've already got on top of that they've got to travel to China, which is not a short journey for all of them. But it'd be nice for him to have a home Grand Prix, and again, there'll be a lot of attention on him, and that'll hopefully help his team and obviously Audi in the future as well. So there's a lot of reasons. But, you know, we're here for the racing. We don't need to dive into the political side of it. No.
Well, that's one piece of the puzzle for the driver market that has been confirmed. Still, no news on what AlphaTauri are doing next year. Of course, they have a bit of an issue. Looks like it's, well, 3 don't quite go into 2 when you take Ricciardo, Lawson and Tsunoda into the picture. So there'll be some news, I'm sure, probably towards the end of the year, really, once Ricciardo hopefully gets back into that seat and can see out the season. We're not sure yet. There's hope maybe he will fly to Japan next week. There is hope maybe he'll be there. Qatar, a more realistic approach, but let's see. I think that metacarpal bone is a small bone in your hand, broken in 7 places.
Yeah,
that's a lot of places for a small bone to break.
It's a lot of places. And when people said, oh, he's going to be back for Singapore, I was like, no chance. It's a hard race weekend. It's tight, twisty. It's not just physical, but it's hot. The heat, so that's an added stress to the drivers, and you don't necessarily feel it as much when you're going around. It's more sort of when you stop, but obviously they're racing in Grand Prix. These are an hour and a half long, so it is super tough. Jet lag and all of that goes with it as well, and the travelling, it was just going to be too much for Ricciardo, especially on that hand. As the sound we can hear now is Pierre Gasly, who I believe, by the looks of it, is the first driver to pop out on the soft tyre.
Yeah, he's coming through the left hand of the old Singapore sling, which of course they took out a few years ago, where the cars used to hurtle over 2 quite big curves, left and right. Then you get to the hairpin over the Anderson Bridge, and you start to peel down Esplanade Drive towards turn 14 with the skyscrapers overlooking the circuit. It really is a magnificent place to go racing, amplified once we get into the darkness. Of course, this session taking place in the daylight, perhaps slightly unrepresentative, but clearly with a lot of action in the first half an hour of this FP1 session. Lots of upgrades being brought, teams and drivers wanting to get the most out of it. But as you say, Pierre Gasly, currently in 11th, is on that soft compound tyre, fastest of anybody in the middle sector. DRS slot opens round the final corner and across the line with a 1:34.980. It's second fastest. It's 2/10 off Lando Norris's McLaren, which still holds on to that top spot. He set that on the medium compound tyre, a 1:34.776. Then Gasly, Russell, Leclerc, Ocon the top 5, so 2 Alpines in the top 5. And after a pretty disastrous Monza for the Alpine drivers, this is already looking better. I know it's FP1. Perez 6th, Hamilton 7th, Sainz, Verstappen and Tsunoda round out the top 10 currently, with the majority of the drivers back in the pit lane, which is where we can find Rosanna Tennant.
You certainly can, and it's still hot and humid. Is it getting cooler? I'm not sure. I actually need to bring a thermometer with me, I think, but I've just watched the man you've all been talking about, Zhou Guanyu, also struggling to get the car turned round in the pit lane. They are coming so close to hitting the pit gantry, or the pit wall. So his mechanics had to help him with that. He's just headed out on what looked like shiny new mediums. So he's heading off in the Alfa Romeo. Of course, it was in Monza, wasn't it, when they couldn't even get the cars out of the pit lane because of anti-stall. So at least it's now just a physical logistics problem rather than something software-based.
Yeah, it's curious that so many cars are struggling in that pit lane. I'm reading the race director notes. I don't think it's been altered at all. So perhaps just getting the angle wrong as they come out of the pit lane. I want to finish off that driver market chat because the last piece of the puzzle is this Williams seat. Logan Sargent, the rookie, the American rookie, currently occupies it. He is very much, though, under pressure, especially, Alice, when you look at his teammate Alex Albon performing so well in that car. But I fear that Logan should have had his chance and these opportunities to shine already in this European season where he's familiar with the tracks and where more often than not the Williams car was a bit more suited. Alex Albon saying this weekend, this track, the next few, it's going to be a tough ask for us to be fighting in the top 7, top 8 as we have been doing. Yeah,
all Logan can do now is keep it out of the wall. It's the name of it help. Without trying to be too blunt, but he needs to try and be as close as he possibly can to Alex Albon. He needs to be right there. Even better so, he needs to try and out-qualify him. He needs to be challenging, giving Alex, adding Alex a little bit of pressure onto his shoulders. But can we see that happening? It's no, is the honest answer. But you never know. Motorsport can be a strange thing. If he just gains a little bit of confidence, then who knows? Confidence plays a huge part in whatever sport you take part in. But it's going to be a tough one for him, and it's been made clear by Williams that he's not necessarily safe in this seat. I hope it doesn't always come down to money. I'm sure Andrew will put in on that one. And
how many million reasons the Sargent has for this seat?
But again, unfortunately, it will come down to that in some way, and especially if he carries on sort of crashing the car. These are not cheap to repair.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zandvoort was the sort of perfect microcosm of this season, wasn't it? He got into Q3 for the first time, final part of qualifying, along with Alex Albon, although he was a long way off Alex Albon's pace again, and then crashed it on his first lap in Q3. Exactly the sort of thing he didn't need to do at that moment. And, I mean, if you look at his statistics, he's been out-qualified 16-0 by Alex Albon. He's more than 0.4 of a second down on Alex Albon. And that's not good enough, basically, for a Formula 1 driver. It's been tough on him. He only had 1 year of Formula 2 before he came to Formula 1, and he didn't have a lot of testing before the season. So it was always going to be a tough ask. If something saves him, it might be that there's not a lot of other options out there that look especially attractive. I think Mercedes are pushing Mick Schumacher for that seat. Toto Wolff's been going on all season about what a great job Mick Schumacher's doing as their reserve driver. But he didn't exactly excel himself in 2 seasons at Haas either. So James Vowles, the Williams team principal, does have a difficult decision to make. And some of it, Alice, will come down to money. Logan Sargent brings money, I'm told. I don't know how much exactly. Williams will be looking for money for that other seat. But they need to. There's a monitor lizard on the track, just like there was a few years ago. I was wondering why there was a yellow flag in Sector 2. I was seeing if anybody was stopped on track, but everyone's still moving. But very slowly, as Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso peel past the lizard.
Oh, there's a lizard again on the track. A smaller one this time.
Okay, understood. Maybe Godzilla had a kid.
I mean, that makes sense.
Verstappen's on Godzilla watch, and we're just seeing an onboard from Max Verstappen's Red Bull, I think, discovering it. Just about avoiding it. It was on the left-hand side of the Dutchman's Red Bull as he peeled round the right-hand corner. So yellow flag out in there. Well, hopefully that lizard finds its way out, or perhaps can get some assistance, maybe from a brave marshal. We'll see. But they're fairly common around here. Been on track before. Verstappen, normally in the path of Max Verstappen, usually. It's like, what is it in Canada? It's the groundhogs in Canada, isn't it, that we always see? This time they've got the lizards here. But that's why the yellow flag's out on track. Sergeant Williams, he's currently clubbed last, 2.2 seconds off the pace on the hard compounded tyre. I'm hearing Frederick Vesti, the F2 front runner, is also being pushed by Mercedes for that seat as well. It's not uncommon to see a Mercedes Junior go into a Williams seat. George Russell, the most obvious of choices in recent history. And actually, Vesti are part of that junior programme, which was once headed up by James Vowles.
Indeed, and so he'll know all about Frederick Vesti, who's very well rated, actually. I think maybe Alice can give us a bit more insight on him in a minute. But I think, reading between the lines, what James Vowles said about Logan Sargent in Zandvoort, first race back, it was basically saying he's not doing a good enough job and he needs to step it up. He didn't say it in quite such blunt terms as I've just done.
I think you'd make a great team principal.
But that's what he was saying. And so far, Sargent hasn't stepped it up. So I think it doesn't look that great for him at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to say, Frederick Vesti, he currently P2 in the Formula 2 Championship, as you said, Harry, with Mercedes. He's been pretty fast all year. He has made mistakes himself, like every driver does. Théo Pourchaire, who is leading the Formula 2 Championship, he's made mistakes as well. But Vesti, the championship battle, I think, would be closer. It's going to go down to the wire, obviously, in Abu Dhabi. He would be closer if it wasn't for his rear wheels, I believe it was, flying off at Zandvoort due to a pit stop error from Prema, and he spun himself on the way to the grid at Spa, so that put him out of the race, and then he got taken out at Monza. So he would be closer, but I think that wouldn't be a bad shout really for him slotting in. He's had good experience. I know that from people in the Formula 2 paddock wanted maybe Sargent to stay and do an extra year in F2 because they felt that his level of experience wasn't high enough to go to Formula 1. They didn't say that he was a bad driver. They said he's a very good driver. He's a very capable, fast driver. Had good results in Formula 2. But it wasn't quite enough. But he was pressured from the outside, from sponsors, from etc. to make that jump. So maybe it was a bit too soon for Logan.
But yeah, but when that carrot is dangled, you can't blame him for taking it, can you? I mean, Rosanna, Logan's best result so far this season, 11th place in Silverstone. Best qualifying was getting into that Q3 top 10 start in the Netherlands, but of course that ended up with the crash in qualifying, and then as Andrew was talking about, the crash in the race as well, which wasn't necessarily his fault, but on paper the results don't look good. But James Vowles keeps saying as long as he sees some rate of development, he's happy.
Yeah, and do you know what, James, again, I go back to the conversation I was having with team principal James Vowles earlier on today, and he was saying, actually, it's on them, Williams. And he said himself, it's on me, James Vowles. I've not done a good enough job with Logan. We haven't been there to support him. You mentioned it earlier on, Harry. He's not had very much running in a Formula 1 car prior to this season. James was saying, you're up into the tens of thousands of miles that you want a driver to have completed. I think Logan had done 700. So he's been up against it, and he's been up against a very good teammate who seems to have found a sweet spot at the moment, driving incredibly confidently, wringing the neck of the Williams, and it has been difficult. Logan's lucky he hasn't been turfed out like Nick de Vries was and AlphaTauri with the very sort of strict policy that Red Bull and that whole sort of fraternity seem to have. But I think James is going to be more lenient for the rest of the season. But of course, you've mentioned money talking, you've mentioned the sort of guys like nipping at the heels of Logan from F2, and it will remain to be seen whether he can hang on to this seat. But I think James is very aware that the team need to support him as much as Logan needs to deliver.
Yeah, I agree with that, but he has had quite a bit of track time before the season started. Nothing compared to, let's say, Oscar. Oscar did a lot of running with Alpine before his move to McLaren, but he certainly has had track time. He was doing some pre-season testing around Hungary, so he's been out and about. De Vries was at that test as well, so They do testing, behind the scenes. In the previous year's car, they obviously can't use the current car, but he certainly hasn't had the time compared to those around him.
Alice Powell just completely revealing the secrets of the testing that might or might not go on. The other thing as well, money does come down to it, but equally if Mercedes are pushing for a junior of theirs, whether that be, I know Mick Schumacher's not technically a junior, but he's a part of the Mercedes team, but Fred Vesti in F2 certainly is. If Mercedes are pushing that, there might be some nice sweet deal for Williams within that as well when it comes to a power unit or some sort of chunk of money being provided. They don't have to pay the salary, whatever it is. So that could well be the sweetener of the deal. But that is basically the moving and shaking from the driver market at the moment.
We could talk about it for the rest of the session if you wanted, but we don't want to bore everybody.
No, and we've got just under 20 minutes left, actually 19 minutes and 44 seconds remaining of free practice one. Charles Leclerc is currently fastest as most of the drivers have moved on to the soft combat tyre in the last 5 or so minutes. He is fastest, Leclerc, with a 1:33.350, just in front, less than a tenth and a half. Max Verstappen in the Red Bull crosses the line to go second in front of Lando Norris in that McLaren, consistently showing some pace at the moment in FP1 ahead of Perez. Sainz on an outlap right now. Tsunoda up in 6th. So are the AlphaTauri upgrades proving good for the Japanese racer who gets his home outing next weekend? George Russell and Lewis Hamilton 7th and 8th ahead of Ocon and Gasly. The two Alpines round out the top 10. Then it's Magnussen and Hülkenberg, the two Hasses. No upgrades for them this weekend. They are bringing a whole new spec car. They are bringing some upgrades, I apologise, they are. But they are bringing a whole new spec. Oh no, they're not, sorry. They are bringing a whole new spec of car.
There we go, we got it.
Oh, they're not bringing upgrades, but they're bringing a whole new spec of car to Austin. So that's where we're at with that one. Sorry, I misread my notes. There's the Haas 11th and 12th. Then it's the two Alfa Romeos, 13th and 14th. Bottas and Zhou. Lawson 15th. Piastri, Sargent, Alonso and Stroll 18th and 19th. And Alex Albon down in 20th and last. But the bottom three still in the pits. Haven't come onto that soft compound of tyre just yet, as one of the Ferraris makes its way past the Red Bull over the Anderson Bridge. Seen a few nail-biting overtakes there over the years. Here's Lewis Hamilton.
Turn 6 is it's 2.5 tenths sector 1, 4.5 in the middle. It's just half a tenth in the final. That is to Leclerc. It's 8 tenths. Where does that come from? It looks like turn 8 is the biggest loss. Sorry, turn 9.
Okay, so turn 9 is some sort of a 90 left, but it's not fully 90 degrees. A little bit more than that.
Let's get the protractor out.
And but I remember that the barrier comes up on you quite quickly. So you go in and you think, yeah, I've got plenty of room here, and then the exit really creeps up on you. So that's a lot of time to lose at turn 9. You have got to run down. That's, I would say, the middle of sector 2. You've got a smaller straight, certainly of the new straight that they've added between 14 and 16, down to turn 10. But I would say that's quite a lot of time to lose at turn 9.
Yeah, now on the Ferrari pace, Charles Leclerc is 0.126 quicker than Max Verstappen at the moment with the fastest time. And I'm not surprised. Remember how quick he was at Baku? He was in the fight for pole at Monaco. I think Leclerc's pole position lap in Singapore in 2019 was every bit as good as Lewis Hamilton's famous one in 2018. It was one of the most spectacular laps of the last few years. And that Ferrari is really good in short duration corners. It was quick in Monza, remember? Short duration corners and long straights too. No long straights in Singapore. But Singapore shares a lot of characteristics to Baku in terms of the corner characteristics, the corner shapes. So I think we can expect to see Ferrari challenging at least on one lap right up there at the front for most of this weekend.
Yeah, Charles did say, didn't he, before the weekend that he does particularly like street circuits. Baku's one of his favourite. Here is one of, if not his favourite track. But then what makes, everyone says, well, why street circuits? What makes a driver so good at street circuits? Perez, he's another one that seems to do fairly well at street circuits. Baku won this year, didn't he? And then he won last year here.
His last 5 wins have been at street circuits.
So, and I guess it is adapting to the grip level. You know, it's dusty, it's dirty out there. So just being able to adapt and with the grip level, but also not being afraid of getting very close to those walls, getting a good sense of judgment of how much speed you can carry through and how you can push those those entry speeds, the exit speeds, and get right up close to the walls. So I would say that's probably what makes a driver pretty handy. Obviously, none of them are going to be scared of the walls, but it's just having that judgment and that connection with the car and being able to position your car in the best way possible through the narrow streets.
Well, with 15 minutes left to go, this is the sound of Lewis Hamilton into the braking zone of the right-hander coming towards turn 15, the new just short of 400-metre straight, which cuts out the four corners that used to take us underneath the grandstand by Marina Bay. You now cut that all out and go straight, and then you meet the turn 16-17 chicane, come out through the left-hander, get oh so close to the wall on your right-hand side before quickly you're diving to the left around the double left-hander of 18 and 19 underneath the Singapore Flyer Ferris wheel and across the line for Lewis Hamilton, who goes fourth fastest, just under 2/10 behind Charles Leclerc, who is currently fastest. Verstappen, Norris, then comes Hamilton and Russell. The top five as Toto Wolff and Jerome D'Ambrosio, along with Mick Schumacher. Watch on from the garage. This is the sound of George Russell coming through turns 1 and 2, and as he comes into 3, the Red Bull in front does get out of the way. I was kind of expecting him to say something like that.
Well, I don't know why he's sort of said that, because he did get out of the way. He didn't really hold him up, so he has no right sort of there to be complaining. Sorry, George. I think he got plenty of... I think it was Max. Was it Max that was almost sort of hovering around in front of him, but he didn't really...
No, it would have been Checo, actually, because Max is in the pits. So not too happy, George Russell, with Perez there. George Russell, I couldn't believe this. He's not scored points in Singapore before. Obviously, with his Williams time, that's more understandable. But he has been looking better of late, George Russell. Would you agree, Alice? Because I think he had a bit of a mid-season slump. I think it's fair to say he just wasn't quite there, wasn't quite on it. He's currently now 7th in the driver standings, but he had from Canada, really, he had the retirement. Hungary wasn't brilliant qualifying for him. He had to work his way back from 18th as well. Then suddenly, after the summer break, he managed to get back on board in Italy with a good result too. So and of course with a top 3 start in Zandvoort. So he seems to have found something with that Mercedes again that's a bit more to his liking.
Well, he's finished in the top 6 in the last 4 Grand Prix, but he's not actually finished in the top 4 since his podium at the Spanish Grand Prix. So he's sort of been floating there or thereabouts. He started in the top 4 in the last 2 races, and he has out-qualified Lewis for the second time at Monza, the second Grand Prix in a row. As we have another yellow flag at Sector 2. I wonder if the Lizard has decided to make his way back onto the circuit. But Carlos Sainz has just popped up into second place, just under 1/10 of a second off his teammate Charles Leclerc, who was on a flyer but ended up not improving. He did set the fastest first sector of anybody, but had a slow middle sector. I wonder if there was the Lizard. There we go. He's just going back. The Lizard has come back out onto the track. They put
tail, No.
Yeah, it was his tail going
peeking out of the wall.
They put out
another lethargic turn 9.
Copy it. Reporting.
because they have put the black and yellow, sorry, the red and yellow, the slippery surface flag out. So, I mean, it'd be slippery if you did run over the Lizard, but I guess they
put it back in now. So I think that yellow flag has gone in. I think we just saw the tail of the Lizard peeling through one of the gaps in the concrete barriers. So for now, the Lizard is cleared, and we're back to green flag running. But all the drivers on Lizard watch.
Do you know, I've always been disappointed that all the time I spent walking around Singapore at night, because obviously you leave the track, it's 3 o'clock in the morning or something, you've got to go and find something to eat. I've never seen a lizard. I've always wanted a lizard to just appear on the path in front of me, and I'm just a bit disappointed it's not happened so far.
Should we get you a pet lizard?
I don't want a pet, but I wouldn't mind seeing one on the street in front of me in Singapore.
Well,
do they only come out in the daylight?
I wouldn't have thought so.
I think they just roam around. It's their city. They can, they pop out whenever they like. But the fully grown ones are big.
Pretty big. You don't want to mess with the monitor wizard.
I don't think I saw one last year either, actually.
But when you were walking around?
Yeah. Now you've made me feel disappointed.
Well, we're going to do a little bit of lizard research. In the meantime, Rosanna, have you spotted any?
Do you know what, Harry? I had exactly the same yesterday. I was a bit disappointed walking around Fort Canning Park in Singapore. And it was in the daytime, but I was really expecting I might see a little snake or a little gecko or a little lizard, but absolutely nothing. So I'm like you, Andrew, left disappointed. Maybe I'll see something over the next few days. But do you know what I have spotted in the Red Bull garage of a certain Max Verstappen? Is a sort of leaf blower, like you'd expect the mechanics to use to cool down the brakes when the car comes in and put it into the roll hoop air inlet bit. But this little air cooler is being inserted into the little hole at the front of the nose of the car. Now, I have never seen this before. It looks like the mechanics have done their best job of fashioning this together, because the pipes look a little bit like your Hoover at home, and they've been masking tape together, and it's being inserted into the car. And I tried to ask one of the mechanics what was going on. Were they cooling Max or were they cooling the car? And he smiled, slightly laughed, and said it's cooling something, but wouldn't tell me. So I feel like the secrecy means it's helping something, or there's an advantage to be gained, but I've never seen it. I don't think Andrew Benson has either. So yeah, a bit interesting. Obviously seriously hot temperatures here in Singapore, but if it takes inserting a little pipe up your front nose, then you've got to do what you've got to do, I guess.
You've got to do what you've got to do.
Got to cool what you've got to cool.
You're listening to BBC Radio 5 Live's coverage of Formula 1 with Rosanna Tennant, Harry Benjamin, Alice Powell alongside me, along with the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson, keeping you informed and entertained. Lizard Watch well and truly underway here in Singapore as we get towards the closing stages of free practice one in the daylight. It then starts to get darker and darker around this Marina Bay circuit, of course, known as the inaugural F1 night race, and it is one every driver loves, but it is challenging. Hot and humid conditions, a bumpy track evolution high as well. It's one of the most physical races. I think drivers can lose up to 3 kilograms of their weight just in pure sweat. Alice, you got on the podium here in the W
You're going to say how much weight did I lose?
But I mean, are you conscious when you're in the cockpit? Are you feeling the heat, or is it just something that you don't feel it until sort of you stop?
No, I personally didn't feel it until I stopped. You feel it when you're sat there waiting on the grid. So once you've taken the car out, in support races, you have to go to the pit lane and then you have to make your way to the grid. When you stop on the grid and the engine has then got hot and you're sat there waiting, in support races, we don't get out the car. We sort of have to sit in the car for 10-15 minutes. It's warm then. You can feel it. You can feel sort of the sweat running down. You're having to mop your brow to avoid it running into your eyes. So you feel it then. But once you get going, you can crack your visor open a little bit, even though it is warm air, but at least it's some kind of breeze getting into your visor. Then, of course, you put it shut when you go racing. They will feel it because their Grand Prix are long. They're much longer than, my race was only 30 minutes last year. They'll be doing a lot longer than that. It's the dehydration that you might not necessarily realise when you're driving round. They've got the water bottle, but that's not like a cold bottle of water out the fridge. That's warm water, and no one likes to drink warm water, but they are encouraged to drink it just to make sure they are trying to replace the fluid that they're losing on the way around. But it's that, and you won't always realise that you're getting dehydrated, and that's one thing that these drivers would have been preparing for this race last week. Their hydration plans would have already been started last week, just to make sure that they've got the right level of fluid there for when they do come out. And they've got quite a few they've got the 3 practice sessions, qualifying and a race, that they are hydrated throughout the weekend. So it's probably one of the race weekends where that hydration side of things is most key.
It's fascinating actually what goes into it. This is the end result we're seeing of them on track. I want to see what's going on last week with, we had a weekend off, no Formula 1. So, but they're not off. They're not tanning. Well, they might be, but they are literally making sure they're getting the right fitness levels in, but also they have to go above and beyond for this race, unlike other ones.
Yeah, and if you do get dehydrated as well, you start to feel tired. You lose that concentration. One slip of concentration, and the walls aren't very far away around this circuit. And some drivers will go into heat chambers. They'll do a bit of cycling. didn't go in a heat chamber, but I put a bike in one of the sort of physio rooms at Alpine, and I got 2 heaters in there, turned them up to full whack, wore leggings, a jumper, and cycled for a good 45 minutes. And yeah, I was safe to say.
Did anyone stumble in on you? And give you
no,
a bit
it was
of a
me and
funny
I
look?
was in there with Abby Pulling was in there as well, because she was racing it in W Series. So we were both in there just trying to acclimatise, to get your body used to, so it's not a shock when you arrive. So some of these drivers as well, they'll be going into more professional, I would say, heat chambers and doing all the kinds of that training just to get their body ready.
Did we cover the fact that lizards are cold-blooded? Did we say that? Because that could be one of the reasons. Well, SJ on the hashtag BBCF1, I thought lizards are cold-blooded, so need sunlight to become more active. So maybe that's why they're not stumbling across you, Benson.
Maybe. I mean, that is obviously absolutely true. On the other hand, it's still like 28 degrees at night in Singapore. So
they're in bed, Benson. They're sleeping. Obvious. All right, thank you for that, SJ. 4 minutes and 43 seconds remaining. Leclerc still fastest. We've had the soft compound running earlier. Who's out there at the moment? Hard compound tyres. It's a real mixture, actually. Still a few drivers out there on those soft compounded tyres, but nobody. Actually, Gasly is out there on a new set of soft, so he might be having another run for Pierre Gasly. And actually, good to have you here, Alice, because of your affiliation, obviously, with Alpine. But Monza was a tough weekend for both. It just seemed they lacked overall pace in general. Is Alpine much more hopeful here?
Yeah, I feel there's a little bit more hope. They knew that Monza was going to be a tough one, and it was always going to be a struggle. Didn't obviously expect it to be as bad as it was. They didn't have a great race here last year. Both cars didn't finish, did they? So they're hoping for a better weekend this weekend. They bought a few upgrades as well, not as many as McLaren, but they bought some upgrades, and already they're sitting. Esteban's there in 10th place, Gasly's there in 12th, as we have another yellow flag in sector 2. I wonder if Andrew's mates pop back out again to
they
have
should
a
have a lizard on that, actually, to be specific, but carry on.
So they're hoping for a slightly better weekend, and I believe that this track will suit them better compared to Monza.
There's a lot of not saying why going on at Alpine at the moment, and
yeah, I'm not saying why.
And Alice isn't saying why either. The why is their engines. Oh, there is a big lizard back on the track. Excellent.
Oh no.
Another lizard, but different one this time.
Russell's got a bit of an expert on monitor lizards' facial features, it seems.
And they do move quite closely, and it is sort of crawling across the racing line. So hopefully all the drivers are aware, and there was a yellow flag out in that part of the track. So fingers crossed for the lizard, but carry on, Andrew.
Yeah, so back to Alpine. The why is the engine's not very good. And if you remember back a couple of races ago, Alpine were asking the FIA for some help because their engine's fallen behind the other 3 engines in Formula 1 on performance, and they've not been the other teams haven't been particularly welcoming to that suggestion. And when I spoke to Bruno Famin, the new effective team principal of Alpine in Spa just before the summer break, that was the sort of weekend where they announced they were sacking Otmar Zafnauer, the team principal, and sporting director Alan Permain. And I said, well, why haven't you been able to keep up with the other manufacturers? The rules are the same for everyone. Development's not allowed, but you can make reliability changes, and often performance is hidden in reliability, or if you improve the reliability, you can maybe turn the engine up a bit more as a result, or a combination of both those things. He didn't have an answer as to why. So it's no surprise if you've got the worst engine in Formula 1 that you're struggling most at Monza, which is the highest speed circuit on the calendar, nor that you'll look more competitive at Singapore, which is nearly all corners and hardly any straights.
I think you've explained it pretty well there, Benny.
Don't worry, Alice, we won't let you. You didn't have to come back on that. Just less than a minute and a half. It's not quite racing, but they're following each other very closely. All throughout this lap is Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, who is absolutely chasing down Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo, going side by side down into turn 1. And Leclerc will have the inside line later on the brakes. Has he made the move? I think he probably has, but we're looking at a rear view camera facing back at Charles Leclerc's helmet right now. He is fastest of anybody. It's a Ferrari 1-2, which will please the Tifosi off the back of a spectacular Monza. And actually, just on Monza, Alice, I mean, how impressed were you by Carlos Sainz by Ferrari allowing them to race as hard as they did?
He did a good job. Well, not only to take pole position, that was a great pole lap, his first podium finish of the season as well, but to keep Max Verstappen behind him for 14 laps. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good job. So I was impressed. I really was. And he's sort of been edging above Leclerc, hasn't he, the past sort of couple of races, which has sort of added the pressure onto Charles. And we saw them get a little bit too close for comfort for some in those final stages of the Italian Grand Prix, didn't we? I remember speaking to Fred after the race, and he said, "No, we want to let them race." And but I'm sure that someone would have told him that could have gone horribly wrong, and it could have. It was a big risk for them, but as from a fan's point of view, it was great to see them out racing. As I'm sure that lizard is still wandering around on the track, but the yellow flag is now in as Lando Norris had to avoid it. But no, I'm glad to see. But he's right up there with Leclerc, and it's a good start for Ferrari in free practice 1.
It certainly is. As the checkered flag comes out, clock comes down to 0, so Leclerc has already taken it, along with Sainz, Perez, Gasly, Albon, Magnussen, Hulkenberg and Zhou. This is the sound of Lando Norris, who was just coming through the old Singapore sling moments ago, and avoiding the lizard there, but now off board that McLaren, which half of that rear wing is covered in fluorescent Glovis paint to monitor the airflow of their new upgrades, of which McLaren have brought many on board. A new stealth mode livery, which they've brought. A lot more black is now incorporated onto that papaya orange McLaren for this weekend and in Japan, as well as part of their ongoing 60th birthday year celebrations. Another livery for McLaren. We've seen the sort of chrome livery back in Silverstone as well. So Williams, another team that have brought a new livery in association with their sponsor Gulf, a fan-designed livery too. But Norris comes across the line, doesn't improve, but stays 4th. So at the end of free practice 1 then, Charles Leclerc is fastest with a 1:33.350, just less than 1/10 of a second ahead of his teammate Carlos Sainz, Ferrari 1-2. Verstappen is 3rd, Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton round out the top 5. George Russell, Sergio Perez, Fernando Alonso, Yuki Tsunoda and Esteban Ocon the top 10. Lance Stroll, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Valtteri Bottas and Kevin Magnussen in the Haas round out the top 15. Liam Lawson, on his first visit to Singapore, finishes his first bit of track time there in 16th ahead of Hulkenberg, Zhou, Piastri down in 19th and Logan Sargent in the Williams 20th and last.
Thank you very much, Harry Benjamin, Alice Powell and Andrew Benson up in the commentary box. So that brings us to the end of FP1, and Charles Leclerc topping the timesheets, says this is his favourite track. But of course, this session isn't representative. So what do we read into this, Andrew Benson?
Well, as I was saying earlier, Rosanna, I'm not surprised to see the Ferraris looking competitive on 1-lap pace. I think this track should suit them. So you're right. It's not a session to take too much from. The sun's just going down as Max Verstappen trails round back to the pits, or actually as the field move onto the start-finish line to do their practice starts. And actually, this is a lovely part of the day as the sun goes down. The lights start to sparkle in Singapore, as you know, Rosanna. But it looks very, very close, I think, is the main takeaway. We've got the top 6 drivers, all separate, or 5 drivers, I should say, all separated by just over 1/10 of a second. So that bodes well for what I hope will be an exciting qualifying session tomorrow.
Definitely. I like to call it golden hour, I think, because the sun starts to set around Marina Bay. And Max Verstappen complaining about aggressive shifts. But Alice, that's something he can fix, right, with the team. We hear that in early practice sessions on race weekends from Max, and it all comes right.
Yeah, they'll easily fix that. I think it's just him teasing the rest of the competition, making out he's got an issue. But yeah, we hear it often. They do gear syncs throughout the laps, but it might be just something that needs a little tweaking on the behind the laptop or maybe in the gearbox. But he'll be all fine and sorted for the next session.
Yeah, and that session will come thick and fast. But of course, FP2, it'll be dark, Harry. So a totally different proposition. But the rookies, what did you make of their appearance in FP1 because it's a tricky track to get to grips with. Obviously not up there in the top 10, and Oscar Piastri somewhere away from his teammate Lando Norris, who has that upgrade this weekend.
Yeah, well, Liam Lawson, best of the rookies in the AlphaTauri, and that in 16th. Zhou Guanyu 18th, and Oscar Piastri down in 19th. I think Piastri is the big outlier there. Of course, that McLaren, he doesn't have the upgrades, or as all of them, as compared to his teammate Lando Norris, and finishing 4th. But I think the fact that they are all down there just emphasises how difficult this track is in the humidity as well. But it's only one free practice session done for them. They would have learnt so much from this session and carry that forward. The Alfa Romeo Zhou Guanyu, it's not to do a disservice to him. It's not too uncommon that we see Zhou down there in the standings. So not Zhou Guanyu, he's not the rookie, what am I talking about? But Oscar Piastri is 19th, so work to do, but they'll be fine.
Absolutely. Well, you can join us again for FP2. We'll be live at 5 to 2. My thanks to Andrew, Alice, Harry, and to you for listening. Join us again for the second practice session in Singapore. Goodbye. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.